Bienvenidos amigos de P1, hoy nuevamente desde el Indianapolis Motor Speedway vamos a meternos en los secretos de un circuito que a simple vista tiene 4 curvas iguales y sabe que son totalmente distintas. P1 entrevistó a más de 10 pilotos históricos y los actuales para contar los secretos de este circuito realmente donde un auto se prepara de una manera totalmente diferente, donde las cajas de cambio en muchos equipos los mandan a Europa para lograr la mínima fricción posible, donde los portamasas se hacen de otra manera, se fabrican especialmente para aguantar 500 millas. A mi fondo está la primera curva, ¿sí? Que es totalmente distinta a la 2, a la 3 y a la 4. Nos metemos en la historia del día, los secretos de Indianápolis.
Number one, Indianapolis is an extremely narrow track. It is very narrow compared to, say, one of the bigger banked ovals like Daytona, Talladega, Fontana, Michigan, something like that. The other issue is that it doesn't have a lot of banking. The corners are quite flat in comparison to a typical oval, so you really have one line to get through the corner. If the car is working correctly, you get all the way up against the wall going in, you get all the way down to the apex coming out, and then you use all the track exiting.
La dirección, la curva cuando tú lo haces más para adentro tiene más banking, tiene más elevación. Entonces eso como no tenemos mucha presión aerodinámica, eso te tiene los coches más firmes. Es por eso que la segunda línea y la tercera línea no son buenas.
There are different corners, in part because you're approaching them for different speeds. The long front straights lead, the long front and back straight lead to turn 1 and turn 3, and then the short chutes lead to turn 2 and 4.
They all have a different visual approach to begin with, which does change quite a bit how you react and how you get there. The apron is quite different on all of them, like the way, the inch point, and how much you can use it.
Geometrically, they may be similar on paper, but they all have their own character and nuances to them. Turn 1 feels like it doesn't have a whole lot of support exiting the corner, like almost like it levels off too early and you lose the front or lose the rear.
La curva 1 para yo es la peor que tiene, porque tiene una salida un poquito en la entrada y después se desce un poco ahí, que los coches muy estable.
Well, turn 1 is very difficult because it's surrounded by the grandstands. You see all the fans. It almost seems like it narrows quite a lot.
I would say turn 1 is the easiest because it's always the most shaded by the grandstands, so the track temperature is lower.
It's supposed to be the same. The engineering designing, it should be the same. But
the graphic.
But it is different. I mean, turn 1 felt much more dynamic, simply because the big grandstand in effect, so you feel like go to the stadium section, and it's more banking. I think it's the most banked corner in myself. I feel it's almost like get into the corner, go to the apex, it's almost falling in to the corner, that sort of feeling.
Turn 1, I think the optimum line is a little bit of a later turn in, a later apex, because it seems that the wind and everything is very can affect the car a lot there.
Siempre hay viento. A esas velocidades el viento, si está soplando hacia un lado, la curva 1 y 2, en la curva 1 tienes viento de cola, en la curva 2 tienes viento en el alerón frontal. El carro se va a tratar de salir de la parte de atrás. Luego tú llegas a la curva 3, tienes todavía aire en el alerón frontal, pero en la curva 4 tienes aire en la cola.
So if the wind is a tailwind into turn 1, that's the most difficult wind direction for this track. If the wind's blowing the other direction, it actually makes it easier because 3 is typically easier than turn 1 is.
If you have a really strong tailwind going down to turn 1, the exit of 4 can be very difficult, and 1 is just a straight up nightmare in that case because you've got no support on the rear of the car and the front doesn't have any load in it. We were qualifying here a couple years ago with a big tailwind from the south going down into turn 1, and every lap was absolutely nerve-wracking trying to figure out what you needed to do as a driver to be proactive with the lift.
When the wind starts to swirl around and between a headwind and a tailwind, you can gain or lose as much as a little bit over 1% of center of pressure on the nose of the car. and that changes the balance dramatically. So when the wind starts to play around and turn, it definitely gets very tricky. And then, you know, if you have a north to south or south to north wind, well, obviously you're going to be slow in one straight, making one corner easy because you have more downforce, and you get slower when you get the tailwind going into turn one, which is usually the harder corner. It gets hard real fast because you get in the corner almost 10 miles an hour faster than the other, and so on top of that you don't have the downforce, and the car feels quite difficult to control. And so yeah, there's a lot of very small subtleties to the exercise that make the whole thing very tricky sometimes.
If the wind is in your back, the car doesn't turn. The wing is in the front, then it turns a lot. So obviously you have to adjust in the car the suspension adjustments to counter that effect. So you're constantly busy doing things in the car, every corners, and the banking is different on all four corners.
And also it can change at any time because the wind can be going one way one day and another way the next, and that can totally change what the car feels like and how you have to approach each corner. So it's a never-ending kind of search for the perfect line.
El problema es el viento. El viento para el 80% del tiempo es como un viento que te digo, un crosswind, no sé cómo se dice en español. Cuando sale de la 2, la delante del carro no te gira. Entonces, para mí la peor curva es la 2.
And the wind direction plays a big part. I think if you ask me, turn 2 is the toughest corner, and I think a lot of it is because you have the tunnel under it, and you have a little bit of drop in, so you have to get the car working over the bump on entry in 2. And then probably turn 1 is a close second in difficulty.
And then I'd say the most difficult corner on the track is turn 2 because it's the most exposed. And the most common wind direction is a tailwind from turn 1 to turn 2. So turn 2 has always been a struggle for all of us. There's a bump there, so there's a lot of factors that make turn 2 pretty hard.
Turn 2, the line is very early turn in and long apex, so you hold the apex for a long time, which is kind of different than turn 4. You turn in a little bit later. It just seems to be that's where the rubber builds.
The wind is really pushing the rear of the car. That's why you've seen a lot of crashes so far this year in turns 2, because it's just a difficult corner. If you're in traffic, you're trying to get low, trying to get air, to try and get a run down the back straight because it's very important. There's also a bump on the way in because there's a tunnel, so you go over the bump, and then at the apex there's a small bump as well.
In addition, there's a gap in the grandstands between turns 1 and 2, so you might feel not much wind, and then suddenly you get a big gust in the short chute between 1 and 2.
Turn 2 is, for me, over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been the hardest corner, just because as you come over, there's a little bit of a crest when the car lands, the front tires grip. And typically at that same point, there's a break in the grandstands there too, where you get a huge tailwind and, makes the car very loose. And we've seen this month a lot of cars crashing.
And in turn 2, by contrast, very, very shallow. I feel like it really less banking, and you're always a little bit worried about rear because there's not enough the bank support, and yet also the finishing on the big grandstand, suddenly there is a crosswind effect. So the car is definitely unstable into the turn 2.
cdmauto.com. Repuestos originales y alternativos para vehículos importados. Desde hace 12 años, directo desde Estados Unidos a Argentina y ahora también a Chile. cdmauto.com.
de la curva 1 y 2 viene la recta opuesta, donde ahí no hay tribunas y el viento juega un papel clave en la incidencia aerodinámica de los autos. Y después van a la curva 3, que es una de las más simples según coinciden varios pilotos, pero hay varios accidentes, especialmente en la 4. La que vemos aquí es la curva 3 y ya van preparándose para la 4, que tiene la peligrosidad de algún accidente, que el auto se meta a los boxes. Ya está ahí en la entrada de los pits. La curva 3 y la curva 4.
Turn 3 feels like the comfiest corner on the racetrack. It feels like it has more banking. I don't know why, but it feels like it has more banking than any other corner.
3 can typically be one of the easier corners, but again, we saw in qualifying that can be one of the most difficult.
Turn 3 tends to be the easiest corner, but if you have tailwind, it could be difficult. That's the thing. It's really, wherever you have the tailwind, you have a lot less downforce going into that particular corner.
Turn 3 felt reasonably, probably one of the easiest out of the 4. But you have to watch out. There is some bumps, coming into the exit.
3, depending on the wind, you're probably carrying the highest top speed into 3 when you're going, when you're in the tow in the draft with other cars. It's very smooth on the way in. I think 3 is the best corner. There's a little bump in the middle of the track exiting 3 that you have to be careful of. But I like turn 3 because if you nail it, you set up very well for turn 4. And turn 4 is tough because you have to get a good run out of 4 if you want to pass down the front straight. So everyone tries to chop low and take all the air away from you, but if you can somehow get in and then get down, get a little bit of air, and you get that run off of 4 onto the long straight, it's really, really important.
And then turn 4 felt like the shortest of all. It's just like turn entry, mid-corner exit, it just comes to the really, really quickly. That's because I think you concentrate so much and you have to get into somebody's inside to get more air. And the turn itself is allowed to do so.
Turns 2 and 4 are both kind of the hardest because there's a lot of load that goes into the car through 1 and 3, which brings the surface temperature of the tire up. So 2 and 4 becomes more difficult because of that.
And 4 is, I would say, the second most comforting corner in that it has good support there, but all of this changes with wind direction.
You really set up the car to be good in turns 2 and turns 4 because that's where you're going to get a run on someone and pass them. It's very hard to pass someone in the short chute.
You got to be really patient, wait for the proper opportunity to pass someone because it is going to be hard to pass. But you got to be able to take advantage of everyone's mistakes, small mistakes, and then hopefully be able to make good moves at the exit of 2 down towards 3, and then the exit of 4 down towards 1.
You have to be thinking all the time, where am I going to position my car? Where am I going to adjust my car? How do I not run into the guy that I'm running only centimeters away from? So they are exhausted mentally after the race because they've been thinking so hard for so long. It's a 3-hour math test. If you remember from school what you felt like after a math test, it's a 3-hour math test.
This race is physical only because of how mentally draining it is. So because it's so mentally draining, it turns into just being tired afterwards. But it's not an outright physical race. It's more mentally draining, and so when you're at those speed for such a long period of time.
Porque tú estás ahí a 240 millas, a 400 kilómetros por hora por 3 horas. Las cosas te pasan muy rápido. Entonces tienes que tener mucha atención. Es una tensión, es un estrés muy grande.
The cars are not hard to steer. They're not hard to drive. The steering effort isn't high. They will be hot and working inside from that, but it's not a lot of physical steering effort. They're not pushing on the brake pedal hard. They are pulling a lot of lateral G's, so their neck gets some workout, but they do have pads holding their head up. But it's certainly a mental race.
Those guys are wired different than we are. And it's not that they don't have fear, but they just don't let it eat them alive.
Estamos aquí donde termina la recta principal, aquí es la parte final del paredón de boxes, y una de las cosas que marcan los pilotos es lo distintas que son las rectas, pero no en su longitud, sino en cómo influye el clima, especialmente el viento. Aquí las tribunas, esta recta va como entubada, allá es totalmente diferente. Es más, los códigos de los pilotos en la segunda recta se trabaja de otra manera, porque ahí se va al pasto, aquí es paredón, y saben bien lo cerca que le pasan y cómo es aerodinámicamente, cómo hay que superar autos aquí en Indianápolis a diferencia de otro óvalo. Técnica en P1.
The straights are of similar distance, and they're pretty much the same other than wind direction. However, the back straight is less shielded by grandstands and things like that. So if you have a tailwind down the back straight, you get more of an effect from that than if you have a tailwind down the front straight, which is shielded by the grandstands.
The two straights really not much other than there's a lot more going on the front straight, and you don't have the grass. So on the back straight you have the grass. If you get blocked down low, you might be able to put a wheel in the grass, which we've seen people do before. But on the straight, there's just wall and wall, and that's when it feels a little bit more narrow.
The straights are so long, you want to go as fast as possible on the straight, so that means you reduce downforce and reduce drag for the wings, which there gives you less grip in the corners. So it's a balancing act. If you want to be really fast in the straight, then the corners become more difficult. You might have to lift off the throttle a little bit, or you can put more downforce on, be a little bit slower in the straights, but be more comfortable and quicker in the corners. So it's a very difficult balancing act, and that's something that we're always changing and trying to perfect.
Tú tienes que decidir la cuestión de cuánto de asa tú quieres usar. Con más asa, seguro que con más asa el coche va más despacio en la recta. Entonces, en un balance de cuánto tú quieres andar más rápido en la recta, pero no va a hacer la curva.
Aero is everything, absolutely. I mean, especially here. Obviously, you need a good car mechanically, a mechanical balance, a mechanical setup on the car, but getting through the air, going down those long straights is where a lot of the speed comes from.
In qualifying, you trim the thing out, you make it go really fast in a straight line because you have new tires for 4 laps, and you try to run with very light downforce, so you make it just go through the air very fast. But for the race, I think it's about how much throttle you carry, so you're going to need grip, and you're going to need a lot of downforce.
The key to the race, very different from the qualifying, is how well the car handles following other cars in the dirty air. This car has a very dirty aerodynamic wake. It blows a big hole through the air and it blows the air upwards. So the following car has a lot less downforce and it does not handle nearly as well.
The balance is important. You need to have a very strong front end of the car to be able to turn underneath someone, but obviously a good enough rear to be able to handle that much aggression.
It's not kind of very simple, the balance. I mean, for sure you need a more secure rear at the beginning of the race because the cars, the track conditions is a lot greener. You know, it has a lot less grip, but then you get more downforce. So at the beginning of the race, but then towards the end of the race, if you feel competitive, then you can basically click down to the rear wing and make it go faster.
So typically the track will rubber in during the race. You'll get more grip, and as you get more grip, you usually build more understeer. So you would try and account for that by, say, adding front wing or changing tire pressures during the race.
I think that a lot of the passing here is about opportunity, is about finding clean air, and sometimes you have to be really aggressive with the placement of the car in order to find that clean air. So I think last year was a good example of that. Obviously, we were starting pretty far back, so we had to be aggressive in order to move forward. Hopefully, I don't have to do the same things this year, and if I do, it'll be for the win and not just to get up to 4th place. So I would say that the moral of the story is you have to be aggressive with the car to find the clean air so that the car works more efficiently.
Every single turn is different. I've had a lot of people say it's just 4 turns. And I've had them drive simulators and they can't even get out the pits. You go into turn 1 and when you're doing 236 miles an hour, it closes in on you. It's millimeters. We measure the car in right height in fractions of a millimeter. And then you go down the backstretch and the wind changes and the track temperature changes. And the tire temperature's up, the pressures are up, the car's entirely different. You have to work your bars, you have to work your weight jackers. It is 4 of the most difficult turns in motorsports. There are some very famous drivers found that out.
Y se terminó P1, ¿le gustó? Se pasó muy rápido. Estamos en Indianápolis, un programa realmente técnico. Sabemos junto con Diego que tenemos muchos fanáticos de los programas técnicos. Realmente tuvo muchos detalles y ¿saben qué? Pudimos descubrir los secretos de Indianápolis, las 4 curvas. A mí me gustó mucho, espero que nos sigan mandando mensajes a todas las redes sociales de P1 y nos pidan el programa que ustedes quieran. Hacia eso vamos a trabajar. Nos vemos el miércoles que viene con más P1.